Greetings and salutations, and welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today has written 19 plays, 3 books, 2 TV pilots, several television series, and 12 documentaries, and was a writing member of Theater West, one of Los Angeles' most prestigious theater companies. 3 of his plays have been semi-finalists for the prestigious O'Neill Playwrights Conference, and his play The Other Half was a part of the 2014 Pittsburgh New Works Festival and West Fest at Theater West in Los Angeles, and top 10 at the Sturts Playwright Festival in London. The Homecoming was a finalist in the Warner International Playwrights Festival, the West Hollywood Gay and Lesbian Playwright Festival, and winner of the Chaos Theory Play Festival in 2011. In 2010, his play Brotherhood won the audience favorite as a part of the Hollywood Fringe Festival at the Trey Stage, and in 2009, he was honored to receive the prestigious Red Carpet Award from Women in Theater for his contributions as a playwright to Los Angeles theater. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Garry Michael Kluger.
Well, thank you very much.
Please tell me I pronounced that correctly.
Yes, you did.
All right, just making sure. I should have asked beforehand, but hey, here we are. All right. Let's start with the accolades. The most prominent one is, as these fog up, excuse the temperature in here, Garry. So it's a little warm here in Los Angeles. For those of you who are local, you'll understand why. The reference.
This is East Coast humidity.
Yeah, it's killing me. So three semifinalists for the O'Neills. Mm-hmm. What's the process? And obviously you've mastered something to become a semifinalist 3 times. So what's the process and how does it work?
It's really very simple. I mean, once a year they just send out their notice and you just send in a play. And I guess, I don't know how many readers they have. I don't know. I mean, I understand they get upwards of 600 to 1,000 plays now a year. I mean, it's the O'Neill Center. So, and I've submitted a lot more, and you either get that letter of, well, please submit again next year. Thank you. Just, we're looking for this year. Or you get, congratulations, you're a semi-finalist. And that's what I've been. I mean, 3 of them, actually the play that's going up now was one of the 3 semi-finalists about 4 or 5 years ago, probably.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I want to delve more into that, but beforehand just because it's a topic that comes up occasionally. Is this the only festival that you will submit payment for?
No, I've submitted for other things before. I don't. You know what? I was an actor for a very long time. Okay. And I used to pay to go to prepared scene showcases. I don't mind if if somebody says it's $10, it's $20. I understand they have readers, they have. It was different when you had to send in hard copies of scripts or whatever.
Sure, okay.
But a lot of these places have a lot of overhead. And so, it's just the way the business is. A lot of times you got to pay to play. I mean, and so it doesn't bother me per se.
Do you find that might be the case because we're in Hollywood and Los Angeles, and so there's things like screenwriting contests that you're going to pay for, but for some reason I find that with playwriting, it's not taboo's not the right word, but it's frowned upon because everybody's a starving artist and you're making your money off the backs of playwrights, et cetera. But do you find that it's a little more acceptable because we're in Los Angeles, or it doesn't matter?
I just think it's, I've been used to it. I mean, since I've been submitting plays, somebody's always asked for a payment here and there. And it depends, if it's, please don't, anybody from Sheboygan, don't jump down my, if it's the Sheboygan Festival or whatever, I probably wouldn't submit. I mean, if it's the O'Neill Playwright Festival, I have no problems with that. I mean, I found out, I believe when something's put in for the Pulitzer Prize, you have to pay a fee.
Oh, interesting.
I believe.
Do you know what that fee is offhand? Or
it's
just
not very much. Probably like $35 or $50 something. Okay. I believe. I could be wrong, and if I am, I'm sure somebody will tell me. But I know
in that case, leave a comment down below if you guys know.
But I know people who have had. One of my plays was submitted for the Pulitzer just because it's not that difficult a process to do. Basically, if you've had to have had a play produced within a certain time period and you can send it in, it can't be a workshop or whatever. It has to have been a fully produced production somewhere. And it's usually going to go to the people who are off Broadway or on Broadway or whatever. But, somebody submitted mine once, and, so quote unquote, I was under consideration.
Hey, why not?
It sounds good. It sounds a lot more prestigious than it probably is, but
I'll try to go back and redo your bio and read it so we can include that. So, and again, I don't know if you're going to remember this. Do you remember what the fee was for Shiblinkin and what the return was, what you got in return?
I guess it's more prestige. I mean, I've won a couple of them that I paid what they call quote unquote the reader's fees. I've won a couple of those, and a lot of them, it's $10. I don't get anything. What I will stop doing is, and I refuse to pay for those. It's a lot of times, and it's a lot more, I think, in the screenplay competitions that you go into. But I've seen it in some play submissions too. They say, well, to read it, it's $10. But if you want 5 pages of feedback, it's $60.
Oh, wow, okay.
And my thinking is, well, if I don't pay for the $60 or their feedback, which I really don't care about, to tell you the truth, they're not going to take my play seriously. It's going to be, he didn't pay for the notes, so it'll go over in this pile. And I could be wrong on that, but that's my, those kind of things seem to be out to make money and not to really care.
Sure. So going back now, when you submitted to the O'Neill, is your play finished at that point, or are you like maybe a third or fourth draft, and that there are going to be some tweaks, but you're
the thing about O'Neill is that when you submit to go to their week-long or their month-long. I'm sorry, it's a month-long writers' conference, and at that point you're supposed to be working on it at that point. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure if a play's ever finished.
Sure.
I mean, a great example is a musical I saw when it first opened on Broadway was Pippin. And they had a redo of Pippin about 4, 5, 6 years ago. And Stephen Schwartz changed a lot of the lyrics in his music. I mean, it's his music. But I'm always wondering, 40 years later, his play apparently wasn't finished. And because he decided to redo it. So the question is a play ever finished? I mean, when it's published, it's basically in stone.
Sure. And I'm sure that there's some playwrights out there who have just like, oh gosh, I really wish I could change that. And I don't know if there are second edition plays or not when it comes to things where there might be.
I think a lot of us as playwrights will look back at, I look back at my very first play, which was funny, and played in Los Angeles, and it got some pretty good notices. It got some bad notices and got some good notices. And there are parts of it that I look at now and go, it was immature. It was immature writing, and I've progressed a lot since then. So, yeah, you look at a lot of early stuff. You listen to Neil Simon, you listen to David Mamet, they'll talk about, I wish I could go back and change that because I didn't, I think I've grown since then. I mean, Neil Simon I consider a mentor of mine, though the guy has no freaking idea who I am, but I still consider him a mentor because I really latched onto his style and his use of dialogue and that kind of thing. But he's even talked about his earlier work that, he's matured as he went along. And if you read his plays, you can definitely see that, from Barefoot in the Park to, Lost in Yonkers. There's a tremendous difference in the tone and the kind of writing and whatever. So I'm not sure if plays are ever finished. It's kind of like architecture or fashion is never done.
Sure. So going on that, though, I mean, you if you're going on like you've matured, I mean, we're always evolving. We're always maturing. So you might as well say that every play is not really what you'd want it to be. It's always going to be different 10 years down the road for you.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the time. There are a lot of plays that, that played 30, 40 years ago that probably wouldn't do well now from subject matter or, for whatever reason. But yeah, I think that's a kind of a true statement. I'm not sure if anybody's ever 100% satisfied, because they'll always, you go to a production of, say, my play is, again, I'll go to Sheboygan, is playing out in Sheboygan somewhere, and I'll go, man, I wish I could rewrite that, or I wish they'd had this rewrite in there, I wish I'd pulled that line, or, that sequence. And I've seen my work done so beautifully, and I've seen it done terribly. And that's the toughest.
I want to delve into that, but before I do, I want to go into. You mentioned Neil Simon being a mentor. So having not directly working with a playwright in that particular realm, how do you learn from that playwright, from not being able to ask questions, and how do you study that in order to learn from them, if that makes sense?
No, I understand exactly what you mean, and it sounds weird to say that somebody's a mentor that you've never met.
It makes sense. I'm fascinated by that statement and that mentality. So I want to know if somebody were to want to replicate that, how they would go about that process and how they would study and what are you looking for?
I read so much Neil Simon. I've seen so many of his productions, but I have a really big book of collection Neil Simon plays, and I read it from cover to cover when I was in college and whatever. And I look at his structure of dialogue. I look at his rhythms. I try to explain. I was explaining to an actor one time that there's a musicality, there's a structure to to plays and to writing dialogue in particular. The one thing I always say is, conversation is spontaneous, dialogue is scripted. The trick is to make scripted sound spontaneous.
Sure. Okay.
And Simon does that brilliantly. Lines just come up, and he's just naturally funny without, he's not writing a, Henny Youngman line that's a bum line.
Sure.
His dialogue just makes you laugh. There's just a reference that he brings up, or there's a little comment that he makes, and you just start laughing. So I would look at his structure, I would look at his verbiage, his use of language, characters, how he draws out his characters. Some of my favorites, I think The Odd Couple is one of my just favorite to read, because it's just the relationship between two guys, and it's just how they talk with each other, how they relate with each other, there's a line. One of my favorite lines is it's at the very beginning of the play where Oscar's having his poker game, and he says, "I got sandwiches. I got green sandwiches, and I got brown sandwiches." He says, "What's the green?" He said, "It's either very new cheese or very old meat." And how can you not laugh at a line like that? And it's just one of those things, and I just hope that I can get a line like that. My last play, and you put cheap laughs in there too, but my last play had one of my favorite lines. It got one of the biggest laughs, and when I wrote it, I was patting myself on the back because I just thought it was real funny. Sure. And I would say it, but I'm not sure how PG rated.
No, you can drop that bomb. It's been one of our last episodes had a bunch of them.
Okay, in this particular the play takes place in 4 decades: the 40s, the 60s, the 80s, and the 90s, and it follows this couple and their children through those time periods. And in one of the scenes, it's 1969. The son of this man, who is a World War II vet, comes out to his parents, and it's a really dramatic scene. And in the middle of it, the father says to him, "Are you still planning to become a lawyer?" And the son looks at him just sort of quizzically and goes, "Why wouldn't I?" And the father tries to explain it, and the kid cuts him off and goes, "Dad, you do realize that you don't need to know how to fuck women in order to practice law, just how to fuck people in general." And I wrote that line. I was so proud of myself. And the biggest thing is, I can be really proud of myself when I put it up in front of an audience. Are they going to find it funny? And it always got a big laugh. Yeah. And it's one of those things, and people say, "How did you come up with that?" I said, "I don't know. The character dictates the verbiage to me."
Sure, but do you know... Did you know going in that I have to have... Did it just pop in? It was just like the muses, kind of connected with you? Or did you it's time for a zinger here?
I'm looking at, because that was such a dramatic scene, and it ended Act 1. And it was a father and son screaming at each other because the man loved his son, but really thought, and it really wasn't that he was, I guess he was homophobic, but he was looking at it realistically in that time period, how his son was going to have a struggle with his life. And I try to infuse humor in everything.
Sure.
And no, I wasn't looking for a zinger. And what happened was, when the father said, "Are you still planning to become a lawyer?" Because the kid had said, not every gay person, dances on Broadway or arranges furniture or, makes flower bouquets.
Sure.
And his father says, and when the father said, "You're still planning to become a lawyer," it just came to me. there wasn't any rhyme or reason to it. I just thought, what's the most? I was thinking it's got to be a sarcastic comeback, and that's all I figured. And that one I was just, and some of them hit, and some of them really miss, and you know when they miss.
Do you know beforehand, or do you know when you're doing the reading?
Usually it's during rehearsals or during a reading of it, and I'll hear it and go, okay, I got no reaction. Okay, I was wrong. I may love it. I mean, you ask any playwright, they will cut some of their favorite lines all the time, and it breaks your heart to do it, but that's part of the business.
Do you save those for later, for another piece?
I always write them down, and I have certain lines that wind up in several pieces. I love to plagiarize myself. Because if you plagiarize other people, you get sued, so it's much easier to plagiarize myself.
Fair enough. You said you like to include humor in everything.
Yes.
So, just for listeners that maybe just getting into this, what can you say what the difference between humor and comedy is?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm going to do it, if I'm going to go back to Neil Simon, The Odd Couple, or Barefoot in the Park is comedy. Mm-hmm. Humor is just humor is usually a moment. It's a line, it's a moment, it's a feeling at a particular time. I think there's humor in everything. There's humor in death. There's humor in life. There's humor in birth. Is
that the same thing as like laughing when somebody walks into a sliding glass door that they think is open?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I remember, and to be perfectly honest, when my wife was giving birth to our first child, they called it natural childbirth, but she had tubes in every orifice of her body. And I remember looking at the doctor and saying, what is natural about this? And my wife looked at me and was like, not laughing. But, our line is, well, you don't cut funny. And, that's kind of a motto of, all of my brothers, I have 4 brothers, 2 and a half brother and a half sister. And all of my full brothers are all writers. And my half brother is a writer too. My sister teaches up at Stanford, is a professor up at Stanford. So we all write, and we all have different genres that we write in, or different venues. My one brother Jeffrey is he writes books. He actually wrote the book to Apollo 13.
Oh wow!
And my brother Steve has written a bunch of plays too. He had a musical that was headed to Broadway, and then the pandemic hit. It just killed off a lot of things. My brother Bruce wrote for Playboy magazine for years, which I loved, because I got to go to the mansion when he came out to Los Angeles. He was working in the New York office. But my brother Jeff also works for Time magazine. He's been their lead science editor for 20 years. So,
did you study writing?
No, it's funny. I always had an ear for it. I grew up in that generation. I was probably one of the first, kind of TV babies or whatever. I grew up in the late 60s and early 70s, and I always loved sitcoms. I used to dream in sitcoms, and I wanted to be a sitcom writer so badly. I think I actually had a pilot of mine stolen by somebody at Universal who shall remain nameless, and
that's you're the second person who's talked about that recently.
But it's the name of the game, and I understand it.
Wait, all right. Let's touch on that, because this is something that hasn't really come up. How do you think that happens? Do you think it's like you left something open, you left something laying around, they snatch it, or you tell somebody a story, you tell somebody a premise? How do you think that happens?
I'll jump back a little bit to explain what it is. I used to do, as an actor, these prepared scene showcases. Where you would go in and you'd meet a casting director, you might pay $10, $20,
sure,
or whatever. And you do a scene for them, and then they critique you, and they tell you what they liked, they tell you what they didn't like. I have another story that's very funny about that. But a friend of mine, the woman, her name is Julie. She was my partner for a long time, and she used to show me these. We used to look for snippets of plays and whatever to do for these people, and then she showed me the scene from a play one time, and I said, I can write something better than that. And I started doing that for us. And casting directors loved it because they were hearing stuff they'd never heard before.
Sure.
And there was a friend of her, my friend Julie's, and there was a friend of hers who was an executive over at Universal who couldn't make the showcase. But they were friends, so he said, why don't you come over to the office and do the scene for me? Do a scene for me. So she and I went over to Universal, and we did this scene. And it went over really well. And the guy said to me, he said to us, where did you find that material? That's really funny. And my friend Jolie, I always said, well, Gary wrote it. And he started to talk to me about that. So I said, you wrote it? And he said, yeah. I said, I'd like to read some of your stuff. So I had 3 pilots that I had written. And I sent it over, and I got a thank you note for sending it over. He said, I'll read this stuff. Well, one of the pilots wound up about, it had been a play written by my brothers, 2 of my brothers. And I'd asked them if I could turn it into a pilot, because I thought it would be a really good sitcom. And it was about these 2 brothers who inherit their little brother. And one of their friends who lives in their apartment building is this crazy judge and this lawyer, and there's another character in it. And that was one of the pilots. And then this series comes on about 2 years later, or a year and a half later, where these 2 guys inherit this daughter. And one of their good friends is a judge. It so incredibly matched the script this guy, I knew the script this guy had. And I won't 100% say it was stolen. I found the coincidence to be something I just couldn't dismiss. And I had no recourse. It's nothing I can really do. The character names were changed, and they changed it from a little boy to a little girl. And he said, "Oh well," and so the line is, "Well, you can't copyright an idea, and you have to live with that, and just understand that it's going to happen."
So there's as far as advice goes, there's no protections that anybody can take as far as that goes. As far as
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I copyright everything the minute it's finished. And it's a lot of people don't realize how easy it is to copyright something. Just go to the U.S. Copyright Office online and just send them a right now. It used to be you have to send in a full copy. Now just send them in the PDF and the title and what it is. It's an unproduced TV, unproduced play, and you can copyright your material. But again, you can't copyright an idea. I mean, I suppose if you have a lot of money,
sure,
you could litigate it or try to prove and take their script and your script and put them side by side, and hopefully a judge will agree with you. But most of the times, you just can't afford that, and you're not going to win, especially if you go up against a network.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you said you send it in. What do they charge that? Is that $35 for the copyright fee?
I think it might be that. It might be $50, but I'm not sure. I think it's between $30 and $50.
Well, I know that there's the old adage as well, where it's like, send it off to yourself in a self-addressed stamped envelope, or not self-addressed. Send it to yourself, sealed, and don't open it. And then if anything ever comes out of it, then you do it. But I don't know if that's legit.
Well, what it'll show is that and a lot of times they say have it registered, so you have to sign for it.
Okay, sure.
But there are people who say, well, I did that, and they'll say, yes, but how do we know that you didn't open it? How do you know we didn't steam it open and then close it again?
Right.
So. Yeah, I had done that every once in a while. I just find it's easier just to copyright it. Or, if it's a TV thing, send it to the WGA. They'll register it for you.
Sure. Okay. Right. You said you had one more funny story, so let's since you touched on it, let's go ahead and break it out.
I was doing a prepared scene showcase with my friend Julie, for this casting for this director. And I didn't even know the name, and I looked him up, and he was a director of, and I won't say his name, but of like grade C movies or whatever. Roger Corman's here. He was still below Roger Corman. And I did a Roger Corman film years ago when I was still acting. So, and I like Roger. He was actually a very nice guy and had some very good movies, but it wasn't considered. Anyway, so we're doing a scene for this guy. And we finish the scene, my partner and I, and we sit down to talk to him. And he looks at the 2 of us and he goes, okay, I don't know what you guys did, but never do that scene again. And then he turns to my partner and said, you just fucked that thing up completely. And he goes to tell her everything. You didn't do your pages, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And he finishes railing on her. And then he turns to me and he goes, and you, young man, this was obviously a while ago, he goes, you have no idea what the writer is trying to say in this scene.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. Oh, yes. So I sort of went, I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please? He said, you have absolutely no idea what the writer was trying to say. And I looked at him and gave that beat, because in my mind I heard pause. And I just looked at him and said, I wrote it. And he stopped, and I got to give him credit. He looked at me and said, well, you may have written it, but you didn't understand it.
Oh, God. Come on.
And at that point, I went, okay, I'm done here. And I got up, and I went to get my picture, because they take a picture. I went to get it back. And he goes like this. And I looked at him, and I said, you know what? I have never hit anybody in my life, and I'm not going to start with a fuck like you. And I got up, and I walked out. And the room went dead. And I had a friend come out and said, do you know what you just did? You know what a bridge you just burned? I said, that's a bridge I never want to cross. I said, but you know what it just showed me? I can say no. And a lot of actors will put up with, I mean, I was an actor and I still am. I mean, but I don't do it all. But we put up with so much shit when you're doing this. And you can say no. You can say that was mean. That was, that was unnecessary. Mm-hmm. And I was called down for it by the woman who ran the showcase. I said, I'm sorry. Didn't like the way he talked to my partner. I didn't like his, to tell me that I didn't understand my own writing. I mean, the guy, that's why he does grade C movies, because he's an idiot. And I said, and she said, well, you should. I said, I'm not apologizing to that guy. I said, if I'd ever hit anybody, I would have started with him. But he wasn't worth it. But the story just, because the things you go through, and as a playwright, I didn't think it would be that. There's another incident I can talk about, and this was, and it comes to submitting plays for festivals or whatever. But there was a theater up in Oregon that had heard about me. A friend of mine was working at it or whatever, and she said, I got this writer you should. And I got an email from the artistic director. And he said, we'd like to see some of your material. I hear you've done this, and this person said you're a really good writer. So do me a favor. And they said, what's your latest play? And it happened to be Thorn in the Family Paw. It was the one I told you that took place in 4 different decades. Mm. And he said, send me the first 10 pages. And I sent him back an email and said, no, I don't send 10 pages out, which a lot of writers will do. Because so they can get a flavor of your writing, which I think is just bullshit.
Sure.
And he said, well, you know how many plays I have to read? And I said, so if you can't read the entire play, then don't read it. But don't ask me for 10 pages. Right. That's insulting. He says, well, I'm just really, really busy. And I said, okay, I'm going to give you a for instance. Okay, say you have, as your company, have a new play opening, and I'm a critic. What would you say if I said to you, do you know how many plays I have to see? So what I'm going to do is come in, I'm going to watch the first 10 minutes of your play, and then I'm going to go home and write my review. And he sent me back an email that says, well, obviously I wouldn't do that because you don't get the story. And I just sent him back an email that just went, exactly. I didn't hear from him for a couple of days, and then finally he sent back a thing and said, well, I hear you're good. If you want it, you have to send us 10 pages. So I said, okay. So I sent him the title page 20, page 63, page 47, the page that said the end. I sent just 10 random pages. Never heard from him again. Was so proud of myself. And I actually am part of a bunch of playwriting groups on Facebook, and I told that story. I got eviscerated for telling that. They're telling me what an asshole I was, how cocky I was. And one guy said, are you ever good? Well, with an attitude like that, you'll never be produced. So a couple of years ago, I said, I've had 4 plays produced this year. So, if I don't get the Portland, I don't know what it was, Portland stage or whatever it was. I said, okay. I'm certainly getting stuff done. I said, I just won't send in 10 pages. You don't like what I did? Then don't do it.
Right.
But it was eye-opening to me, because that's what I honestly believe. How do you read 10 pages and figure out? And the thing that was really interesting, which I tried to explain to this guy, is because my play took place in 1945, 69, 80, and 92, if he just read 10 pages, then he would assume the entire play took place in 1945. 100%. He'd have no idea what the story was. And there are places like the O'Neill, they will, they say send us the full script. I have no guarantee they're going to read past the first 10 pages, but at least they put the illusion that they're going to read it. And that's what I said to the guy. I said, ask for the script. You hate it after 10 pages? Stop reading. I've done that plenty of times. I've had friends send me stuff. Please read this and give me some notes, and I'll read 10 pages and go, oh, okay. You just need to stop reading.
Yeah, in the festivals I've done, I've read, I just can't not read the whole thing. if somebody's going to take the time to send you their work, at least show them the respect to read it. I have friends like, well, I would have stopped. Why? It just, if you're presenting something, at least have enough, dignity is not the right word. Integrity. Thank you. Yeah. To show them, that you're worth their time, or they're worth your time, I should say.
Well, I mean, you look at the play that's, Walking in Space, which is going up at Theatre West now. I started that play 12 years ago.
Wow.
And it's the kind of thing, like, I can write a sitcom in 2 days if I have to. My brother works for, hopefully I'm not telling tales out of school, but my brother, one of my brothers works for Marlo Thomas, who was from That Girl or whatever. Yeah. And they were talking about doing a reboot of That Girl. And my brother and I were talking about it, and my brother said to me, and I actually had a conference call with Marlo, because they had sent me some treatments from some writers, and they were asking me what I thought, because I'm very good with sitcoms. And I said to my brother when we hung up, I said, I could write this show in a couple of days. And I did. I wrote Marlo a pilot for it. What I didn't realize is Michael Eisner was part of this whole process, and he had already paid one of the writers to do a treatment. But Marlo was quite impressed. He said, first off, you wrote it in like 3 days. And it was like, yeah, I did. So it's the kind of writing. That's different. When you start a play, I mean, plays take a long time. And I don't know anybody who has a play up and said, oh yeah, I just started it last year.
Right, sure. Do you think that has to do with the formula of sitcoms and pilots and screenplays, opposed to there's not really a formula when it comes to playwriting?
No, there isn't. Sitcoms are very formulaic. There's a certain beat about them. I mean, if you look at your better comedies, I mean, the comedies to me, to date, the best sitcom ever written is The Dick Van Dyke Show, the original 1960s. I have all of them. Actually, was blessed to meet one of the writers from The Dick Van Dyke Show, and I gained. Those are other writers that really kind of mentored me, and when I was looking at television, because that was some of the best writing that still is today, 50, 60 years later. It's still, to me, probably one of the best shows ever written. I mean, you can go along with MASH and All in the Family, and shows, a lot of the Norman Lear shows.
Sure.
But they're still the same formula. You still got 22 minutes, and out of a 30-minute thing, you have to read 22 pages. And that was very funny. As a friend of mine who was a sitcom writer once gave me advice. He said, you ever get on a sitcom? Here's what you do. You write 4 versions of your script. Because what happens in sitcoms is you write a script, and they do a table read, and everybody laughs. On day 2, they don't laugh at the joke, so they heard it yesterday. So they think, okay, something's wrong. So they have you rewrite it. And this happens all during the table reads. So by the time you get down to the shoot day, it's the 4th watered-down version. So a friend of mine said, write 4 versions of your script and hand them in backwards.
Interesting.
So you get what you think is your funniest handed in last. And I did that once, and it turned out to be true. But that's the thing. That's corporate thinking. I've worked for Disney. I've written for Disney. Live entertainment for Disney, and a little television for them, but mostly live entertainment. And when I was working live entertainment, a very good director friend of mine named Glenn, who works at Disney for years, said to me, understand this, you're going to walk into the office and you're going to be a writer one day. Next day you're going to be a scribe, because you're going to write exactly what they tell you to write. That's one of the big differences. The corporate writing, the network writing, is nowhere near as free as live theater is. I mean, I guess live theater is the only place where the writer has the final word.
Sure.
And they always do. I mean, as a member of the Dramatists Guild, somebody's doing a play of mine anywhere in the country, I can go and shut it down if I think it's that bad. David Mamet did that not a couple of years ago with Oleana, where a director in Michigan or something took his play, and it's a play about a sexual harassment between a professor and the person changed to a male student instead of a female student and turned it into a gay play. Nothing wrong with it, but that's not what Mamet wrote. And there's not a playwright I know who didn't. A lot of people are not enamored by David Mamet as a person.
Sure.
But they said absolutely he had every right to, because it's not the play he wrote.
Right. Sure.
And how dare a director make that decision?
You let's hopefully give some inspiration or some motivation in this question, that for a play that took you 12 years. Because I think that there's plenty of playwrights out there, or even writers in general, that they'll work on something and then it gets put in the drawer and then never gets revisited again. So what is it that keeps that made you stick with something for 12 years and now here we are, where it's staged and being produced?
In this particular case, it's because it's so personal. I've had stuff I've stuck in a drawer. I have things that I've started that I've stuck in a drawer. Everybody has.
Sure.
You read
everything that I've written is just stuck in a drawer.
Well, you read. A lot of times you read your stuff and go, "Oh, what was I thinking?" This is, to me, to be able to write a play. If I germinate an idea, I have to be able to see A to Z and a middle point, M. But I don't have to know everything that comes there, but I have to be able to say, okay, this is a full, this will work. It just won't work up to here. So it has to be a full arc for me to start it. Walking in Space is based on actual events, and it's kind of my therapy with what happened to me in my life and my brothers. And so it was a very, very personal play for me. So I kept writing it and rewriting, and then I did remember doing a reading maybe 7-8 years ago, and I just heard it, and people were crying during the reading, and I said, okay, I've got something here. And so I just kept working on it. And then I joined Theater West, and I brought it in to the writer's workshop at Theater West. We have a bunch of workshops, an acting workshop and a writer's workshop and a Shakespeare and musical comedy. So we have all sorts of workshops at the theater. And I brought it in and I workshopped it. And I would bring different actors in, and I would rewrite scenes and I'd bring it in. And then it culminated with a staged reading in 2019. And then they were talking about doing it as a production. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and our theater was lucky. We survived it, because a lot of small theaters did not. And when it came back, I really started pushing, because I had done some rewrites during the pandemic. It was, I didn't have a lot else to do. So, I worked on that play. And I just stuck with it. And the theater finally, because the reaction from the stage reading had been wonderful. And they said, well, okay, we'll take a chance. I mean, it's expensive to do it, and you don't make your money back. And
Sure.
Why small theaters like Theater West are nonprofit.
Right.
That's sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, but that's just the way it is. I mean, and there also was a thing that happened 4 or 5 years ago called AB5.
Yeah. Which
killed a lot of small theaters, because a lot of actors were working for free, basically. And now we have to pay everybody minimum wage, which a lot of times it takes your $25,000 play to $50,000 or $40,000, and a lot of theaters can't afford that. I know a bunch of theaters that just ignore it and don't do it.
Sure.
But we're not one of them. We try to do everything we can. It made a huge difference, because I'm also the associate producer on this play. And so when the producer and I were going over the budgets, we were carefully budgeting rehearsal time. I mean, all of our designers were in this play were paid a stipend, were paid a fee, but the actors are all on, are
Right.
all hourly, and we have to pay them. So you can't do 17 weeks of rehearsal anymore. You have to really, work it all out so you can afford it.
Sure. What do you find that it's benefit? Talk about the benefits of being part of a theater company as a playwright.
Well,
and is there a fee behind it?
Well, I mean,
membership fee.
There's a membership fee, and there's the monthly dues. At which, if you look at what you get for monthly dues, it really does seem, But then I forget I'm not 25 anymore, and it's different for a 25-year-old than it is for a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old in our theater. I didn't want to be part of a theater company for years. I was asked to join certain ones because I was afraid that people would say, "Well, we'll do your play, but you have to use these people." Well, you don't have a 75-year-old black woman in this play that will play this role. Oh, well, then we'll just use somebody else. It's like, I was always afraid of that.
Sure.
Or Theater West is not like that. I found out, you put up a play, you have to go to the company when you audition first. If you can't find your role within the company, then you can go somewhere else and bring somebody in. Theater West is there is an initiation fee and there's a monthly dues, but as we tell, there are 5-6 different workshops that you do. The writer's workshop is just wonderful to me. It really, because we try to be positive. You don't bring in screenplays. Please don't bring in your screenplays. I've actually helped, and we have 2 moderators, but every once in a while, neither of them can be there, and they'll ask me or one other member if we'll moderate. So I've moderated the writer's workshop from time to time. We had one guy who just used to bring in screenplays, and when he would go for critique, he'd go, I don't want to hear it's a screenplay. And I was moderating one night, and I said, well, let's start off with the fact this is a screenplay. And he got really pissed at me. I said, I'm sorry, you have 47 scenes, 73 actors. It's not a play. So please don't tell me it's a play, It's that adage, don't, piss on my shoe and tell me it's raining, it's, right. That really ticked me off. If you're in a theater company, we're working on theater, and it should be that. It's a very...
Were these all 47 different locations as well?
Yeah. I mean, there was like a hotel hallway and outside under a canopy while it's raining. And I'm going, and people just used to let him do it. He's actually kind of a well-known writer. And I'm not going to get, again, I'm not going to do names, but it's like, this isn't that's not what the writer's workshop is supposed to be about.
There's a screenwriting workshop for things like that.
Go to that. I had no problems with reading it, but that's not what we're a theater company, so we should be reading plays.
Sure.
But it's very nurturing in there. We're not allowed to say, in critique, we're not supposed to be saying, well, you should rewrite this scene to do this. Somebody tried that one time, not with me, with another writer, and that writer just cut him off and said, you know what, you write that. That's not what I wrote. So we always try to be positive and say something like, yes, I understand. I'm not getting that you want this person to be likable because they seem unlikable. Or, things like in that vein. It's supposed to be, beneficial for you. It's supposed to be, good critique. Anybody can sit there. And it always worried me because if you're a better writer or somebody you're perceived to be better, people will just knock it because they're not as good as you. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got to be prepared for that too. I remember when I was doing A Thorn in the Family Paw, we brought in a scene while we were doing rehearsals because we try to do that into the writer's workshop so they can get a view of what you're doing. And we just did the first scene, and we had one writer in the back go, I just don't see the thorn. And I was just like, oh, Jesus. And the moderator went, you're seeing the first scene, don't worry about it. But, you'll get that every once in a while. But it's just it's a family. I mean, I know it's so cliche to say that, but it really is a family. And when we were auditioning this play, I had a great turnout, and we had kind of cast one person already, and there were 6 other roles, and I was overwhelmed and had so many choices, which makes it hard, but makes it wonderful. And even when people are disappointed, I don't want to say there's a joy in it, but I had somebody who was very sad because they really wanted to do it. They really loved the play, and that tears my heart out. But it's also a compliment in the fact that they really want to do your work. And I've had people ask me to write things, for them before, and I have. There was one actress at Theater West, she has since unfortunately passed away, but this was in 2016. She said, write me a goddamn scene that I can do in West Fest. West Fest is a festival we put on every year of short plays. So I wrote a scene for her, and she was brilliant in it. But, I've had people do that, and I love doing that for people if I can. It's all part of the... like I said, I can write a scene in a day or less, 8-10 pages or whatever. You germinate an idea. And, I mean, there's a scene of mine that I wrote recently about a guy coming back from a trip. He walks into his bedroom and catches his sister in bed with his girlfriend. And it's a 10-page short scene, and it's been a part of a couple of Pride festivals and whatever else, and it was filmed, and I loved it. And I actually sent it into a theater company for a women's theme thing that they were doing, and they sent it back and said, well, our theme is actually more around Planned Parenthood, but can we please hold on to the scene, because it was so great when they came in and auditioned for it. And I say, sure, but
What's the secret to being able to just rattle off a scene quickly? And
I think you just have to have the idea and be willing to just sit down and just plow through it. I mean, 8 or 10 pages is, it's funny because a lot of times I'll be looking, if I'm doing rewrites or something, I'll realize I've worked for 6 hours and written 3 pages. Sometimes I'll work for 6 hours and have written 15 pages. It's just how your brain starts flowing. If the idea is funny and you can see the arc even in 10 pages, to me that's just really easy. It's just I know I want to go here, I know I want to end up here, how that I get from one to the other. That's the fun part, and your characters will dictate that to you.
do you write at home, or do you write somewhere else where there's no distractions?
I write at home. My wife works for Caltech. My son is still at home, and he's going to college. So I have a back room that I write in. That's mine, my office.
So you've got A to Z, you've got M in the middle, and then what's the process? Is there, let me outline the rest, or let me just start at A and just get to M, figure out how to get to M, and then figure out how to get to Z?
That's it. I never outline. I never sit down and outline, because the chances are I'm never gonna follow it. I know where my middle point is. In a full length play, I know where intermission is.
Okay.
I know where I want to end Act 1, and so I just try to get there. And then once I'm there, I said, okay, I know what the rest of the play is. Now, how do I get there? And a lot of times, and it sounds very Joan of Arc, the voices in my head tell me, where they're going. No, I wouldn't do that. And I'll have to listen to them, because every once in a while I'll start to write something. I go, nah, he wouldn't do that, or she wouldn't do that. And so it takes it. Or, like I said, that line from the son in that one play, screaming back at his father, just hit me when I was writing, because that was a relationship.
Sure.
People. So you just let the characters take you to where they're going to go in your mind, and you just sit down. And the thing is, you just have to sit down and write. I will say that I have never had writer's block, and I can tell people. And people say, "How can you say that?" I said, "Because if I don't feel like writing, I don't write." I'm a huge football fan. I'll go on the Baltimore Ravens, site, and I'll read about them. I'll try to sit down and write. I don't get a block. I never consider it a block. It just says I'm not interested today. And then there are days that I write all day. Mm-hmm. That's just, I think saying I've got writer's block is one thing that's going to really stop you, because you've already put yourself in the mindset that you can't do it. Casting director once, and I will parallel it to this. I took a workshop years ago with a casting director, and we were doing mock auditions. Mm. And this one actress got up to do the scene, and she looked at the casting director, who was our teacher, and she went, I've got a really bad cold, so I don't sound good. I got a really bad cold. And the casting director looked at him and said, okay, sit down. You don't have to do it. And the girl was freaked out. She said, you just told me you're going to be bad, so thank you for not wasting my time. Mm. And what a lesson. And that's the same thing to me. If somebody says, I got writer's block, then you've already put yourself at a disadvantage, because you're going to believe it. Just say, I don't want to write. Go out and play golf. Go for a walk. Go running. Do whatever you like to do as a hobby. If you don't feel like writing that day, it's not a crime.
The old adage that I always heard is the play's ready when you're ready.
Yes. What the biggest thing that I see on these playwriting sites, groups on Facebook, is, how do I know when my play's done? And the answer is when you write the end. Mm. Or that's one of two answers. Or when you're finished telling your story. Because there are too many people who go, well, I'm at page 60 now, so that means I can only write another 28 pages, or I can only write another 40 pages. It's like, no, there's no rules. The sad thing that happens a lot is, that I'm finding now, is people are saying, well, I don't want more than 4 characters, and I can't run more than 90 minutes. Because people won't sit in a play for 2 hours. And I'm going, really? Avatar, Way of Water, 3.5 hours, but you'll sit through that. At our theater, we have an intermission and a bar. So please don't tell me, if you can't sit for 2 hours, then I probably don't want you in my audience anyway. I mean, if you have a attention span of a flea, excuse me, I'm not insulting anybody, but I always find that to be really bogus. Sure. It's like 90 minutes, that's as long as it can go. I don't understand why.
Right. writing A to M, or to intermission, if you will, are you editing as you go along, or are you just like, let me get to intermission first, and then I'll go back and fix whatever,
No,
or figure out some problems?
My process is, I know a lot of people who write the entire thing and then go back and start tearing it apart.
Sure.
What I have a tendency to do is, say I write 15 pages. When I come back the next day, I'll start at page 10, or I'll start at the beginning and read what I've done, and I'll edit as I go along, and then I'll continue. That's how I edit.
Sure.
So I'm editing all the time, or something will strike me when I'm going to bed or whatever, and I'll just write myself a note to take out that line, or how about trying here? And I'll write, and I'll stick it on my desk. And so, but I edit as I go along. So if I start and I go 15 pages, and then I go back to one and read it and then continue, then I'll go back to where I stopped the first day, and I'll read what I wrote the next day, and I'll edit as I go along. Sometimes everything's fine. Sometimes I do major changes. Editing is, and then once I've done a reading, I'll go back and do a complete edit. My wife gave me a suggestion for my latest play at one point. Just, she had seen it and she knew the story, and she said, I think you're missing a big thing here. And I thought about it for a long time, and I went back and changed the section completely because of something that she said, and she was correct. But, it was 5 or 6 pages, but it really made a difference in the play.
What do you find that, especially like on these forums or these groups, and there's tons of them, there's the official Playwrights of Facebook, and I'm sure there's some other ones out there, What do you find that in your opinion, is what is holding a lot of playwrights back?
I think themselves, a lot of the times.
Okay. Is there anything in particular that stands out to you in those statements?
It's their discipline. It's their following rules that don't actually exist. It's, again, the biggest one that I find is that somebody's read a book somewhere that says, this is how you write a play. Mm-hmm. That's like saying, this is how you jog. This is how you run a marathon. I ran a couple of marathons, and I was on this training press, and they said, I ran it the way I ran it.
Sure.
And I write the way I write. I think people get in their own way a lot of times because they've read this book that says, well, if you're not halfway through your play by page 60, you're really off. And especially in playwriting, I understand it in, not so much in film, because film can be, like that, especially TV.
Sure.
TV there's a very strict formula for things that you have to be able to write, and you have to stick to a certain format, and I understand that, Right. Writing sitcoms, and it's a little different now because you have them on HBO and you have them on, as opposed to just the networks. But it was always 22 pages, it's 22 minutes of writing. You've got to figure in your commercials here. You got to have an A story and at least a B story in each episode. Sometimes you can have an A, B, and a C. Look at Friends. There's always, that's a great, you want to see good writing and good structure and whatever. You look at shows. You have to, you have to follow what's on the air, and it's very easy, and but it's very structured. That's one thing. I can understand. I just still think you can take it from a book. I always think that the best. You just do it and learn, let somebody read it, and, if you trust them. It's like I said, when I submit to competitions or submit to festivals or whatever, they always say, do you want the feedback? It's like, no. You either liked it enough to put in or you didn't. If you didn't like it enough, I don't care why you didn't like it. Not my concern. I know there are people who love my writing. I know there are people who hate my writing. It's, story that I tell. My first play came up. My most, as I call it, my most immature, but it was funny. And I had a good time writing. I had a good time when it was up. But I had two reviews that came out on one day. One calling it the best thing they had seen all year, and somebody else called it the biggest piece of shit they had seen all year. And they saw the same show on the same night. I don't know. I've always said you're never going to be as good as your best review and never as bad as your worst. You're always going to be somewhere in the middle. And that's another thing. People write afraid of critics. If you're afraid of being critiqued, don't do it. Because, I got a show opening in 10 days. I've got a bunch of reviewers I know that are coming. And God bless them. Let them write what they feel. If they don't like it, they don't like it. I can't do anything about it. I'm not going to change the play for any particular person. But I got to let it stand on its own. And what is that? If you can't stand the heat, don't, get out of the kitchen.
Sure.
I mean, that really applies. That really applies to acting. I mean, as an actor, you could get rejected 9 times a day. At anything. And if you can't deal with it, then don't do it.
Let's go back a little while ago, because you talked about seeing your work and it being absolutely terrible. What were the circumstances and how did you deal with it?
Well, there are 2 of them that I can think of. The worst one was I wrote this short play, and there's a short play festival that goes all over the world, and they were doing a Hollywood version, and one of my plays got in it. And it was called Happy New Year. And it was about these 2 college couples that woke up in a hotel in Vegas on New Year's Eve, on New Year's Day, and they find out that they had gotten married the night before. But the 2 guys had married each other, and the 2 girls had married each other. And they weren't gay. And it was very funny, and it was in a bunch of festivals. I even did it in a high school.
Wow, all right.
My daughter was, I used to write for my daughter's drama department. And it was picked up, and it was at the Stella Adler Theater up in Hollywood where they were doing this festival. And it's a 10-page play, and it opens up, and they're all lying around this hotel room, and one woman gets out of this bed completely naked. Mm-hmm. And that's with my daughter. She's about 14 or 15 at the time. I didn't care. She didn't care about that. And she was a director in her high school. I didn't care so much that she was naked. It made no sense because nobody else was.
Right.
And the guy in it jumped 3 pages in a 10-page script. And so the whole play was out of sequence. This woman it was complete nudity. She didn't get dressed during the entire thing. She got out of bed and faced the front. At one point, they're supposed to be looking out the window. She came right up to the edge of the stage, completely naked, just opened the thing and stayed that way there. And my daughter turned to me and goes, "I hate this." And she said, "It's not that she's naked. There's no reason for it." And I'm hearing her as a director. She's gone, "I don't know what this director was thinking." And my play ended, and my daughter and I got up and walked out of the rest of the festival. And I got an email from the director who said, "What did you think?" And my email back to him was, "Don't ask the question if you're not prepared for the answer." Never heard from him again.
Oh, wow. Wow.
The other one was, it was a festival in Pittsburgh, I think. Or I think that was one. I don't remember. But it was one of my favorite 2-man. It's a short play, about 18, 20 minutes. And it concerns 2 brothers, and one of them is a hitman, and the hit that he was assigned to was his own brother. And it opens up with one guy tied to a chair, and the brothers had been estranged, so they hadn't even seen each other in years. And it's very dramatic, and it's won a bunch of awards, in short play festivals and whatever. But they did it in one. No, it wasn't Pittsburgh; it was someplace else. But I got a video of it, and I have a favorite line in that play. It's one of my favorite lines I've ever written, to tell you the truth. And it's when this guy's begging for his life, and he asks his brother Hitman. He says, "Why don't you just let me go? You say you did it, and I'll just disappear." And he said, he looks at his brother and goes, "I'm not the witness protection program. I'm the reason they have it." Which was one of my favorite lines I ever wrote. And I see the tape of this thing, and the guy goes, "I'm not the witness protection program or thing." And I'm listening going, "You just fucked up one of my favorite lines in the entire world." And there was nothing I could do. And I remember putting that on Facebook. I hate it when my favorite line in a play is just completely destroyed. And the woman who ran the thing knew what I was talking about, and she yelled at me in a private message. I said, "I'm sorry. I have a right to express my opinion." And she said, "Yeah, well, that guy and the director just says, I'm sorry." And I said, "I wasn't great. I got to tell you." And that killed me, because it was just, it didn't look good, it didn't sound good, and There are just people who don't understand, and you shouldn't ignore lines if you have problems. I'm always available. If somebody's done my play, well, most of the times. And so call me up and ask me, or write me, and I'll tell you exactly what I think or what I believe in it. Because as the playwright, I'm the final word.
Sure. What is it? What is that? It doesn't look good. It doesn't sound good. Expand on that.
Good dialogue is like good music, has a rhythm to it. And if you don't understand the rhythms of the line, then it doesn't sound good. I write in a certain rhythm. I write in a certain... I have very fast dialogue. If you try and slow things down, but a lot of times that happens and you get over it in rehearsals, or you explain it in rehearsals. Looks good is just... If it doesn't look good, that to me is just a directorial thing. I just think you have a bad director.
Is it that it's lacking set, or is it just the lighting's bad?
It's not even so much. It's not even so much that it's the movement of the actors, how they interact with each other. It's how the director shapes it. I'm not even. I don't care whether you have. There's a great cartoon of a palatial room, and then next is a black stage with 3 chairs next to each other and another chair over here. And they said, this is how, actors see a set. This is what it really looks like.
Yeah.
And it's the truth. So I don't care about the accoutrement. I don't care about what surrounds it. I care about how they interact with each other and how they deal with each other and how the director shapes it to get out the message that I'm trying to say.
Sure. What was your track? What path did you start in film and television, then just realize I need more control, or did you start with playwriting and then delve into?
I was in, again, it's the writing started. I always used to write things when I was at summer camp. I used to write plays, and I always had a pretty good ear for it. And when I started writing these scenes for the showcases, that's when I started writing my plays. One of those, my first scenes I ever wrote became my first play. And I was writing and acting. The first play that I wrote for myself because I wasn't getting cast and stuff. And when it finally went up, the director told me I wasn't right for the role. I didn't fire him, but I also was producing, and he said, you're producing, you're writing it, you try to star in it, something's going to suffer. And he was right.
Yeah.
And I actually agree with him. But I just kept writing, and then as an actor, I'm 5'4". I'm a small, kind of thin guy. The smallish kind of guy. So there are certain roles that I was never going to play. All I ever wanted to play was a cop. They wouldn't let me because I'm 5'4". I was never a cop.
You could have been in Police Academy 1 through 6.
Yeah. Yes, I could have been next to Bob. I actually was in a movie with Bobcat Goldthwait. So, but there was a wonderful casting director. Marvin Page. He used to do General Hospital. I believe he's passed away. And if you're not, I'm sorry, Marvin. But he saw me in a showcase one time, and I knew Marvin. I'd known him for a couple of years, and he came in and said, "You're adorable. I said, "You're never going to be on a sitcom. You're never going to be on a soap. You know that, right?" He said, "You're too damn short." He said, "You wouldn't be dating the women." And I went, "Yeah, I already knew that." That's what I always say to young actors. I don't care what they tell you in high school. You can't play everything. So watch television, understand what your role is, understand what you're going to play. And Marvin called me at one point and said, "Can you do me a favor?" I said, "What?" He said, "One of my actors is doing a movie, and we're doing camera blocking. Can you come in? We'll give you $500 for the day and feed you." I went, "Yes, I'll be there. I'll be over at those ABC Studios or wherever it was." And I went over. It was for the 12-year-old who's in. Because he said, "You're about the size." And I went, "Okay." I didn't care, and he gave me an under 5 on that, a couple of weeks after that. So I got to play a bellhop on General Hospital or whatever.
There you go.
But you have to understand, your limitations. You can't do everything in a business. And it's even a limitation in writing. I have a friend at Theater West. His name is Charlie. And he's one of the best political kind of Aaron Sorkin writers that I know. I don't write that, I have a certain kind of lane that I'm in with my writing, and I understand it. I understand stuff that I can write really well, and there's stuff that I try, and sometimes it's good, and sometimes it's not so good. I know what I write really well. I can't write what Charlie does. I can't write. There's another guy named Steve Neville who's a wonderful writer. I can't write his thing. His stuff is almost poetic, the way he writes. We had a woman that's left the company who was a television writer, won an Emmy, as a matter of fact. Her name was Leslie. She's one of the craziest people I've ever met, and probably one of the most brilliant writers I've ever listened to. Just know your lane, and there's nothing wrong. Again, you can't do everything.
Sure.
So stop trying. Do what you do and do it well. I mean, it's like those. A lot of times you'll see an actor, is a comedic actor, who'll try to do a dramatic role, and they always talk about whether it works or not. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But there's nothing wrong with doing what you do and continuing to do it well.
Sure. What makes a brilliant writer? Since you just
what makes a God, that's a great question, and it's so open. To me, it's a sense of dialogue. It's a sense of believability. Dialogue is scripted, and conversation is spontaneous. Again, to me, it's the person who can make that script sound so spontaneous and sounds like it's coming out for the first time. Somebody whose characters are so layered. That, unfortunately, to me, and this is not true for every sitcom. I mean, if you watched All in the Family, you watched MASH, everything. There are a lot of deep characters.
Sure.
But for the most part, sitcom characters are two-dimensional, or maybe three-dimensional.
Right.
But, in playwriting, the deeper that you can do, the more layers. Sometimes there's a one line that you can give a character that gives you a peek into their psyche, or gives you into what makes them tick. And it could just be one line, and you sit there and you go, whoa. Or you see a moment in a play, or you see an argument in a play, and something is said, and you just sit back and you inhale, because it's just literally taking your breath away. That, to me, is a brilliant writer. Mamet does that a lot to me. Simon, for his was brilliant to me for a lot of different reasons. Just because I think he's probably one of the best dialogticians in the world, always has been. Aaron Sorkin's another one. That if you just listen to Aaron Sorkin, though, he's got a very distinctive pattern.
Sure.
And they do tend to sound alike, a lot of his characters, but it's dialogue to me is the biggest thing, because it's not like Terminator, which I love.
Sure.
Terminator was not known for its dialogue.
There's some brilliant one-liners in that.
Yes, everything can have a brilliant one-liner, and there are many, many things that are just brilliant one-liners. But it's not known.
Sure.
Top Gun is not known for its brilliant dialogue. I love that, and I am the biggest. Like, my son and I are the biggest Marvel fans. Robert Downey can take a line and do anything
Sure.
with it that he wants, but I don't think the screenplay's ever going. For Avengers is ever going to win an Academy Award.
Sure. So, just for clarity, brilliance does not mean quotable.
No. It just means you just sit there and you're rapt. You're just every word. It's kind of like, I remember the first time I saw Chorus Line with the original cast. And I remember we got in there late, and we were sitting waiting for tickets, and we got last-minute tickets, 7th row. And I remember we got in, I was sitting in the theater, I was taking off my jacket when it started. And I realized about a half an hour into it, I was still holding my jacket and taking it off, because I was just mesmerized. And really good dialogue, a really good, like, you listen to a scene like from A Few Good Men, which was a play, and you listen to that courtroom scene. That's a brilliantly written scene. And I was a huge West Wing fan. I had the whole DVD section, and that was Aaron Sorkin. And some of his dialogue is just, you just go, where do you come up with that? There were mistakes in it that I found.
Sure, okay.
But he also used to love, because he wrote a sitcom, I guess it was, called Sports Night.
Yep. Which was everything. It had everything to do with. It was about everything else but sports.
Yes, it was everything about sports. Loved it. Only ran, I think, 2 or 3 seasons.
I did a couple scenes from it in a workshop, acting workshop, and I have to say that it made me enjoy the series. I never watched it. I'm like, this is stupid. Why would I want to watch this show? And then I'm like, oh, this is actually pretty clever.
It was, and my wife, who is not a sports fan or whatever, she and I just loved it because when it was finished, I bought her the DVDs, and every once in a while it's a brilliant. But I found, having rewatched it, he used so many lines from Sports Night in The West Wing, and the exact same situation. Again, he's like me; he's going to plagiarize himself because other people.
Sure.
If he does that, but the lines fit. You know, they were the same kind of situation. But two scenes with in Sports Night was the father talking to his son, and in the West Wing it was the president talking to his daughter. It was the same scene with almost exactly the same dialogue and the same ending line of all you ever had to do to make me proud was come home at night. And I looked at it and went, oh, Aaron. But it's a great line.
Sure.
So why not use it in more than one place? But, you know, that to me is just his dialogue. It's just, and you just sit there and it makes you exhausted because it's so fast. And
do you think playwrights can learn dialogue from sitcoms or
I think they can
television or from movies?
I think they can learn rhythms.
Is that true? Is the rhythm based in the writing for a sitcom or a movie, or does that come from the editing?
Well, that's a good question too, because it may not, because I don't know how much of a scene has been edited out, or
sure,
how much of a thing has been. I think if you have a good writer, if you're watching, I mean, one of the funniest shows ever written was Get Smart. It was Buck Henry and Mel Brooks, and it's just brilliant. Yes, you can learn to write. I mean, Neil Simon's, The Odd Couple became a movie. It's probably most people know the movie more than they know the play.
Or even the television show.
Or the television show, as was Barefoot in the Park. So, I mean, they can translate. But, and I think you can learn. I think if you have an ear and you just listen to, not putting down, because a good friend of mine was in the movie Porky's. If you remember that movie, you're not going to learn anything from the dialogue from Porky's.
Sure,
but you can learn from you can learn from August Wilson, from any of his stuff turned into a movie, or you can learn from Norman Lear's stuff. I mean, All in the Family was brilliant. One Day at a Time, when he was doing, was another sitcom on in the 80s, I think it was, Barney Miller, which was, dialogue's brilliant. Again, I'm a very dialogue, I refer to myself as a dialogue-tician.
Sure.
I made up my own word. Because I think dialogue, to me, is the most important thing in a play. That's just, that's my, if my dialogue is humming, because I write plays, I don't write 90-minute plays. My plays are 2 hours with an intermission, and the people, I've had actors come up and just go, God damn you, there's so many words in this.
Right, sure. Yeah. Do you follow the two-act structure? I meant to ask that earlier when we were going through it. Okay.
I believe in the two-act structure.
Okay.
I mean, I've done a lot of one-act plays,
sure,
and the longest being probably between 20 and 30 minutes. I don't think, there are a lot of plays, we were having a discussion. I'm on part of the artistic board over at Theatre West, and we talked about what constitutes a full-length play, and some people say an hour, and I go, an hour is a long one-act. I'm sorry,
sure.
I don't think an hour is a full-length play. The full-length play, to me, has to start around 90 minutes. I think, I saw Iceman Cometh in Hollywood in the 90s, I think it was, or late 80s. It was 5.5 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, thank God for 3 intermissions and 2 bars. But it was brilliant. I got to see Jason Robards, play the role, and it was freaking brilliant. But when people say to me, I don't want to see, I said, "Do you ever seen a full Shakespeare?"
Yeah. You
ever seen O'Neill? Long Day's Journey into Night, Death of a Salesman. These are not short plays. I don't think there's anything wrong with sitting in a theater for 2 hours. I really feel bad for people who can't do it. I understand if you have certain problems, but I'm saying the thing about, you go see, again, Avatar, and I liked it, but it's 3.5 hours or something like that, something close to that. And if you can sit in there and not squirm and not worry about, at least a 2-hour play, most of them have an intermission.
Right.
You can get up and stretch. It's... it's a mentality I don't quite understand.
Sure. What where was I going with this? I wanted to go back because you touched on it, and it's not what, it's how. and I don't know if you can answer this because you're not in the midst of it. How do you write layered characters?
Excuse me.
Sure.
You have an idea of the character when you first start writing. And, I mean, there are going to be characters, there are going to be tertiary characters or whatever in any play that, just come and go.
Sure.
They don't have to be that.
Right.
But if it's a main character, if it's one note, it's I have an actress who was in my latest play and said she sounds shrill a lot of the time. I said, well, then find the levels in it. I said, this line doesn't have to be yelled. Mm-hmm. It can be spoken softly, and it can be just as powerful. I said, but if you find out, you find out somebody. That's a difficult question to really put a finger on, because it's just how they develop as you write, and all of a sudden you might say, you might be doing a play and you find out a character is struggling with their sexuality, or they're struggling with this, and you say, oh, that's an interesting thing to explore. They might seem like this macho guy, but you realize that he's actually a closeted gay man, and it's a level. It doesn't always have to, and I don't mean to put it down to that, but that's layers of a character. I mean, if they're just one note, if they're just, you don't see a soft side to anybody. If you're all you're seeing is the hard side, it's not a layered character. If you're seeing the soft side, if you're seeing the quizzical side, if you're seeing the fun side, I mean, characters are, it's just like any person you really know. They're not the same all the time, and they shouldn't be on stage either.
Do you think that maybe it's putting them into different circumstances where they're going to be forced to react differently?
Yes. I mean, if you're putting them into situations that they're not used to is a huge one.
Sure. Okay.
But how, there are times when somebody hits a situation that they're not used to dealing with. It was like that one play I told you where this father finds out his son is gay in 1969. This is a man who grew up in the 30s, and he was a young man in World War II, and he's confronted with something he has no knowledge of, and he has to deal with that. It's something that hit him in the face, and his son just brought it out, and so he's and in this scene he's going through, you can see that he's going through 97 different emotions, because he loves his boy, but he does, and he says to him, I don't want this for you, and the son says, no, you don't want it for you. and you're going, yeah, he's probably right, because the father says at one point, well, how am I going to explain this to everybody? It's just like, and the kid says, just tell him I'm your son. You don't have to explain anything to him. And this takes place in 69, so it's even more so than it is today, because we accept it a lot more today.
Sure.
But if you put it back in that time period, and so this guy is, who was fought in World War II and has always been kind of a macho guy, and comes up with a son who's gay, it totally changed his whole perspective on everything. And he had to deal with being hit in the face at the moment while his children were there.
Is there, in the forums that you're on, or the sites, is advice that you give playwrights that seem to struggle?
Again, it goes back to get out of your head. Stop listening to everybody. And half the time I'm saying that includes me. I'll just tell you, I said, I can't tell you how to write. Only you can tell yourself how to write. But you're not going to learn it from, excuse me, book writers. You're not going to get it from a book. I mean, you can get it from a writing class a lot of the time. But, I made an apple pie one time because I had a recipe book, and my wife was freaked out because I actually made the crust. I'd never baked before. I can't cook or shit, but I came home, my wife said, what is that? I said, I made an apple pie. She said, what do you mean you made an apple pie? I said, I made the crust. I said, I don't know, the recipe was here. I just followed the recipe. Yeah, you can do that with an apple pie. You can read directions from IKEA and build a table. I don't think you can read, you need to be at your climax by page 52, and then by page 80, you have to be already coming down, and by page 90 or page 110, you have to be finished. It doesn't work that way. Stories don't work that way.
Right.
I mean, life doesn't work that way. Things happen as they happen. And write what you feel. Write when you want. finish telling your story. What is, thing is, what is the story you're trying to tell here? In the play that I'm doing now, if you don't mind if I plug that while I'm here.
No, I insist that you do, and then I have a follow-up question to that.
The play is called Walking in Space, and it happened to me. I theatricalized it. I said in one interview, and I put it in my bio, Truman Capote, his book In Cold Blood, he used to refer to it as his nonfiction novel. Because it was actually, everything happened, it was true, but he sensationalized a lot of it.
Sure.
I call Walking in Space my fictional autobiography, because all the incidents that happened in Act 1 happened. It's 100% true. The makeup of the family is different. What happens after Act 1 ends is different. That's all theater. I forgot the point that I was trying to make. The question that you were asking.
Layered characters, walking in space. You were going to plug.
Well, I am plugging it. It was just that.
The advice.
Yeah,
we were talking about advice for writing, being in your head and writing what you want.
Write what you want. Yeah, and so I wrote this play, and it. I go with what actually happened to me, and people will say, and the story didn't. But this is the story that I wanted to tell, and I knew when it was over. It was over. I knew when I finishing that story, I didn't have to ask anybody, oh, is it, am I done now? Or
sure.
How do I know when I'm done? It's a very personal piece, and to sit there and watch it is very tough a lot of the times, because I know what I was going to say. The play deals with the fact that there were these 4 siblings whose mother was a drug addict. And this was in the 70s, when they didn't have Betty Ford clinics, and they didn't have these places out in Malibu. And so what happened to us is she wound up being committed to the drug section of a mental institution, and was dried out there. But the play's not about that, really, though that's the main thing. The play is about the relationship of these 4 siblings. Sure. So that's the point that I was trying to make. You'll look at it and they say, a lot of people in a lot of the press that I'm against it, it's about addiction. It's really not. It's really about family. Mm-hmm. It's really about how this particular incident almost ruined this entire family, and how the family got through it. And they got through with it by sticking together. And it happened. I mean, I've had people say, wow, how did you come up with this story? It's like, well, I lived it. It's that one, somebody asked me in an interview earlier this week, said, how do you get your ideas? I said, well, this one was easy. I mean, it was, I just lived through it. And I wrote it as a book first, before 12 years ago, before I did it as a play. And I got a lot of good feedback but they all said, memoirs from men don't sell unless you happen to be a celebrity. And I got it. And everybody said, you're a really good writer. I really liked it, but we don't see any market for it. And my friend Glenn, I had mentioned him before, said to me, I've always waited for you to do this one as a play. And then I started trying to think how I can do this as a play, how I could put it on stage. And I wound up realizing, okay, I can do this. I can do the drug part of it. Afterwards, I'm going to have to just make up shit.
Right.
And that's what I did, and that's where it turns out. But it is still the story of these 4 people, these 4 siblings, more so than the story about their mother's drug addiction.
Sure. Okay. And this opens when and where?
It is at Theater West, 3333 Cahuenga Boulevard West. And it opens on September 8th and goes through October 8th. Friday, Saturdays, and Sundays. Friday and Saturdays at 8, Sundays at 2. We're going to try to have some talkbacks with some mental health experts and some addiction counselors, and just for the audience or whatever. But it's a very personal play, and it's one. It's really interesting to watch, because I get very clinical when I'm writing, so it doesn't affect me as much. When I'm in rehearsals and I see my life playing out in front of me, and I see people playing my mother or my brothers, whether it's a girl or a guy. I've often felt, I've been sitting there watching, and I feel a hand on my shoulder, and I'll look up, and it's my director, and she'll be going, "You okay?" Because when you get personal, that personal, it can be really hard to watch. And I didn't realize that when I was first writing it, and then when I started hearing readings, it started to get to me. Now that I'm watching it actually act out, it can be even worse, but also at the same time exhilarating. I mean, I always get that feeling. There's nothing quite like being the author of a play and watching it, because you've created a world, you've created characters, you've created this whole scenario, and you're watching it in front of you. I mean, I don't care whether it took you 6 hours or 60 years to write it. You sit there, and if you're lucky enough to hear the laughs, just as a laugh, you hear people crying. I wrote a play about a guy dealing with the death of his wife, and somebody told me, a friend of mine saw your play and decided to go into counseling because he hasn't been able to deal with the death of his wife. And things like that just break your heart and make it sing at the same time, which is a real dichotomy, but it's true. And I've heard people just in rehearsals, because we don't let anybody really, we've a couple, sniffling or whatever during certain parts of my play. I go, okay, this will work.
Nice. Are you working on anything else now that this is being staged, or are you on break right now from writing anything new?
I had written a play that we did a reading of in March, a new play called Death in Cold Cuts, which everybody always loves that title. Was based on I was at a Jewish funeral in 2019, and we walked out of it was a memorial service actually, and we walked out and there was the big spread, which is very common in Shiva houses, and I guess, Italian wakes and whatever else. But I just remember walking out and going, damn, it's Death in Cold Cuts time again. And I heard that line and I said, okay. And I wrote the line down. I found a napkin and wrote the line down. And the entire play came from looking at that spread. And so I've been working on that. My wife, it's just actually very funny because we had a staged reading of it in March or April. And I came home and I started doing rewrites. And the script has been sitting on my kitchen table since March or April, and my wife finally brought it back into the other desk in my office and said, yeah, it's been on the kitchen counter for like 5 months now. I'm putting it over here. So once this opens, when I say I get involved with the play, I'm helping to produce it. I wrote it, and today I was building the set before rehearsal started, because I helped my set designer, because the one problem with our theater company is getting people to build.
Sure.
So sets got to be up and got to be finished. So I was doing that. So I've been so busy right now. I think come September 8th, I go back to the other play and start doing the rewrites on that I've already started. And then hopefully, forge ahead with that one.
Nice. And where can people find your work?
I have 3 books that you can of audition scenes that you can find on Amazon. And I have a couple of films that you can probably find on YouTube. I'm actually in one of the worst films ever made, because I thought it was supposed to go overseas and it wound up on DVD, and so it's called Getting Lucky. Don't rent it. It really is. I play a leprechaun, which is one of the reasons why I pretty much gave up acting, because the last 3 roles I had before I really started writing were 2 leprechauns and an elf. I was Murray the Elf for Disneyland. Wow. So, when you're Murray the Elf, can you really go any higher than that? So I turned to the writing.
With some lifts, you might.
I had an agent one time who told me to get some lifts that made me all of 5'6". And I walked in and said, this is not going to get me any more work, and I'm going to fall off my shoes and hurt myself. So...
and what about your stage work? Can they find any of your work out there to stage or produce?
Yes, I have.
Outside of the audition books? Yes,
outside of the audition books, I have 4 of my plays that are available online. They're available on Amazon. I think it's Semi-French. There's one, Players Press has one of them. So yeah, I have and a bunch of one acts that are out in press, out in print also.
Great. And then finally, are you on the socials?
I'm on everything. You can find me. I'm on Instagram. I got 3 different Twitter accounts. You can find WIS 2023 is the website for Walking in Space for 2023. You can find me at iktproductions.net. which is my personal website. I'm Bayroy under Instagram, Baroy, which is a very funny story. And I'm on Bayroy, I think, under Instagram, and I got one Twitter on under Bayroy, and a bunch of other ones. It's a nickname I've had since college. So
throw it out there before we wrap it up. I don't want to leave anybody hanging saying, well, you didn't know, didn't get to hear the Bayroy story.
The Bayroy story is my younger brother Bruce had written a musical when we were in college. And at that time, you couldn't just print shit out yourself. You had to actually go to a printer to do the stuff. So we got the program, and we had to figure that the guy who typeset it was definitely stoned when he typeset it, because everybody's name, everybody's name was spelled wrong. Everything was spelled wrong. I was his sound designer on that one, and I was working the lights also for my brother. And Gary, Garry, came out, Garry Kluger came out as Baroy Kluger in the program. And by the time it came out, we couldn't do anything about it because it came out the day before. So I was Bayroy Kluger for the entire run of that show. All of my friends started calling me Bayroy. So I just kept the name. My friends in New York, I have a really good friend named Wayne Duvall, who's a really well-known character actor, still writes Bayroy to me when he's ever talking to me. And so I have used Bayroy for everything. I use the name all the time. I actually have a couple of shirts where I got, a couple of bowling shirts where I had Bayroy put on it and whatever. When I ran the one of the LA marathons, on my bib I had Bayroy written on my bib. So so you can look for stuff under Bayroy Kluger too, I suppose.
Well, Bayroy Kluger, thanks for coming on to the Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, and share this channel with a friend if you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform. Be sure to leave a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.